Hello, RantboxTV world. Once again, I'm here on a video that should have gone out on a Friday. So if it's Friday and you're watching this, all has gone to plan. Today, we're going to talk about Britpop, all the highs and lows and deconstructive criticism around that period of time. I have people in the room who I'll quickly introduce. We have Joe from Desperate Journalist. Joe, if you want to say hello.
Hello.
Excellent. We also have Symren from Primitive Ignorant. If you want to say hello.
Hello.
Hey, man. We got Simon, also from Desperate Journalist. How are you doing, Simon?
Good, thank you.
Good answer. We have Charley, who sometimes plays guitar in Desperate Journalist and has been in every other band besides them. How are you doing, Charley?
Hello, viewers.
Fantastic.
I must point out, actually, Symren didn't flash green when you introduced him, which means he won't be shown on video.
Sim, you want to say a louder hello?
Oh, hello.
Very good. Thank you, Charley. I have various questions. I'm going to open up with this one, and then you guys can decide how you feel about answering it via apparently a hand system that we've employed courtesy of Charley. So, first question is, what is your perception of the UK music scene before Britpop as a term became, before the term got widely used?
I'll go first. Mine was basically nil because I lived a very transatlantic childhood and I only came back to live in the UK in, I think it was 1999. So I had a very strange experience of British pop culture, which was basically, I lived in America for most of the time, but I'd come back to the UK every summer. So this may also inform a kind of a very strange nostalgia that I try and view in the context of other people's experiences of actually having to live in Britain at the time, compared to my sort of like literally summering within Britpop sort of situation. So yeah, I didn't really know much about it until I read articles in Q magazine, basically. And I was also a little bit too young for it at the time. So yeah, and a slightly wrong perspective based on yeah, fractured places that I was living.
So is it fair to say that the magazine, what, Q and various other ones contributed to what you know of Britpop? And have you gone beyond those understandings since?
I would say it's definitely, Q magazine was definitely my sort of window into the world of what was going on in pop music, because I didn't really have any friends in the UK to speak of that I actually, you know, connected with in any meaningful way because I was a bit too young. I think after that, when I actually moved back to the UK, initially I was really, really sort of interested in it, but it was again sort of from a slight outside perspective, and now I think I view it in a much more kind of detached way.
Fair.
Yeah.
Any hands for the next answer to that first question? Charley.
Well, I mean, I wasn't quite sure I understood the question about perception of the music scene as such, but I will tell you, I am older than Joe. No, really, viewers, I am. And I see, for me, right, so Britpop, this is like the early 90s, right? We're talking about early mid 90s. So like I started being in bands in the late 80s, at which point it was kind of like pop music had been brilliant when I was a teenager, and then suddenly pop music was rubbish. It was all like Curiosity Killed the Cat and I don't know, Stock Aitken and Waterman and stuff. And everybody that liked music as opposed to just you know, pretty people on top of the pops in my peer group all got into kind of indie music and guitar music, and everything became, you know, I think it felt like a separate thing. Like you did music, you played guitar in a band, and it was kind of like it was, you would never expect to be on top of the pops, put it that way. And for me, when Britpop came along, it was like a load of people going, hey, we can play guitars and we can be pop stars too. So that's my perception of things changing with Britpop. I don't really know what my perception of the music scene as such was before Britpop, other than that it was be in a band, be cool, but you won't be on top of the pops. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, to clarify, you've actually got the question just right there. Essentially, I'm asking what was it like just before it kicked off. So we're thinking maybe like say 91, maybe 1990, but even then it didn't really kick off until like say 94 in terms of like the wider perception of people using the term Britpop. But yeah, we have Symren and Simon left regarding this first question. Any takers?
Go on then. Yeah, so I mean, I think I was a little bit too young for pre-Britpop. I kind of really got into music through Britpop. So I guess that was because of things like indie bands going on top of the pops. So yeah, that was my perception, was before that Britpop was what enabled bands to be able to do that. And before then it was all a bit cliquey and underground and grubby.
Wicked.
Grubby,
yeah.
Actually, it was
Like,
fairly grubby, to be honest.
Rebo and I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, shoegaze and.
I can kind of associate your understanding of Britpop, Simon, with my own experience, even though I am slightly older than you. I remember basically being 16 at the time, really getting into the idea of pretending to be Jarvis Cocker in front of the mirror when I thought everyone was asleep upstairs in my house. But I'm sure they knew I was dancing around to Common People when Glastonbury was on. I'm sure they knew. There's that. And there's also my love of the kind of era that was just before it. That was like kind of like the grunge thing with like, say, Nirvana and whatnot. And then also discovering Radiohead. So it's a weird amalgam of various different musical ideas and cultural understanding. But I'm now a lot more detached from it, courtesy of a certain, say, written interview in The Quietus. But we might talk about that later, we may not, I don't know. Symren, you are the final person to talk about Britpop in terms of how you saw it before it was really widely used as a term. What do you think of that period of time?
Well, I think the music scene before was, I just remember like having kind of DM boots, being 13 and having DM boots in combats and, you know, wearing kind of, like band t-shirts, like Nirvana were the sort of phenomenon, weren't they? And then there was loads of just how I saw it anyway, loads of terrible bands affiliated with the whole grunge thing. You know, Nirvana were pretty amazing, and I was kind of into the Lemonheads. And then I remember I used to go to the Marquee on Tottenham Court Road, which is now Wetherspoons. And I remember it used to be like, you know, they'd be playing like Nirvana and I don't know, Red Hot Chili Peppers and like Offspring and stuff. And then I just remember going there and almost overnight, everyone was like wearing Adidas t-shirts and like, you know, cut their hair, and it was like 1994 or something. And it was like, I don't know. It just seemed really sort of, to a sort of 15-year-old, it seemed kind of really enticing and glamorous and something you could feel sort of a part of. And I guess all the bands before that seemed to be kind of American. I don't know, but I could be wrong. I was quite young, it was a while ago. Yeah.
Sure.
But yeah, I remember seeing Elastica on Top of the Pops. Like Charley was talking about Top of the Pops and just thinking, fucking hell, like I've not heard anything like this before. Obviously, you know, the song was ripped off from Wire, but at the time I didn't realize that. Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I think I'm going to move on to the next question, which is a whole load of heaviness. So, where does the journalistic construct of Britpop begin, and what is the legacy of our awareness of its existence? Anyone? This is what keeps me up at 3 a.m. in the morning. So you're just going to suffer as well now.
I'll say something.
Go for it.
Well, my understanding is one of the first main times that Britpop sort of was used was there was an issue of Select magazine with Brett Anderson, and there was a big Union Jack behind him, which obviously was not his choice. And it had the headline "Yanks Go Home,"
I remember.
I think that was like one of the main things, but I don't know.
Okay, yeah. That was obviously not his choice being the main thing that I'm pulling from that, in that some bands were given maybe less choice as to how they were being shopped, for want of a better word to the world. I suppose Suede were one of them, but I think Suede ducked out pretty early for various different reasons to do with interband stuff. And so therefore there was a whole vacuum, I think, that was being filled by these other bands who may have been more willing to be swept up in that Britpop vehicle, I think. But yeah, other people in this room stop me from talking myself out of my life.
So, I mean, is the question twofold, as in sort of what do you think it originally was coined to say, and what does it now mean? Because I think there are two different things.
Yeah, I'm liking your reading of it, but when I say where does the journalistic construct of Britpop begin, I'm talking about where it actually was kind of like first manifest. And I suppose that magazine cover that Simon was talking about is a good signpost. And the second half of it is, what is the legacy of our awareness of its existence? So again, I could be citing that Quietus article, but now that we know of it being of a constructivist nature, how does it affect our nostalgia about it? You know, I'm quite happy to take interpretations of a question rather than my initial thought.
I mean, I reread that the Quietus article that was, I don't know if it's the one that you're particularly speaking about, but it's the one that was published on the anniversary of Parklife.
That's the one.
Which I find really interesting. I disagree with a lot of it, but I agree with a lot of it. And I think that the way that the writer has talked about Britpop bands not necessarily really having too much in common in terms of genre, apart from basically being mostly white male bands with guitars, was an overt Britishness and detached intelligence, which I think is how I perceive it now, as this sort of, and also sort of through the prism of a kind of that particularly 90s aesthetic of ostensible postmodern kind of reworking of 60s, you know, the 60s in essence. So yeah, that's why, I mean, I might be jumping the gun because I know you've got a question about this afterwards, but that I do consider Pulp to be a Britpop band, because but then I also have this benefit of being somebody who can like be really detached in viewing all of this stuff, because I wasn't in the UK like as a proper, you know, performing member of cultural society. So I saw it all from the journalistic point of view, and also as someone who was about 10 years old. So yeah, it's easy for me to now think that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll definitely get to Pulp in a moment. Charley, Sim, do you have anything to say regarding that question?
Yes.
Yeah,
I did.
Oh, whoa, okay. Maybe Charley's going to answer first, and then we'll gather what the question is from her answer. Go.
I've been rummaging, looking for a record, and I can't find it, because I was like, what is the legacy of our awareness of its existence? This is the legacy. Basically, the Indelicates did this brilliant album, and this is the lyric book, you see, called Univer Breaker, which is about how, well, it's a kind of concept album about Brexit. And one of the central themes in it is that, like, Jimmy Savile is like this punch character that has basically, that's like, bear with me, viewers, I've got a bit overexcited. But
it's okay.
One of the strands within this kind of thing, which is about how this kind of, there was something twisted and dark in England that has kind of like led to this awful thing happening, is that Britpop caused Brexit, because everyone was so busy being nostalgic and retro about everything that the thing is, I've overreached myself, because this is something actually I talk about a lot, and I've gone and got excited and looked for the record, and now I've forgotten it. But basically, for me, that's the legacy. The legacy is an amazing concept album about how Britpop caused Brexit.
I want to check out this album, and I definitely want to throw it out to the room. That are we talking about Brexit? Are we talking about Brexit being caused by Britpop, or Britpop exposing what was already there that might have happened anyway?
I would like to just say, I completely just don't buy into this idea at all. But I know a lot of journalists do. I've read other people say it. I remain unconvinced.
I want to hear more of how you're unconvinced. I want to give Sim a chance to answer the question, and then we'll come back to your unconvinced moment.
I can't remember what the question was. What was
All right, I will say it again, okay? Where does the journalistic construct of Britpop begin? And,
right.
what is the legacy of our awareness of its existence? I'm sure this can be written out a lot better, but as I said, I wrote this down at 3 a.m. in the morning. It felt good, and here we are.
I remember the cover of Select that Simon was talking about. But I suppose for me, I kind of, it was that summer of 95, I think, when I sort of became aware of it as a concept, as a load of bands who were around at that time who had been bunged in together. I think kind of maybe when Menswear came along, possibly, yeah. Like they seem to encapsulate it. I don't know, like I always thought Suede were kind of, you know, a bit more out on their own, you know, a bit darker musically, you know. I don't know, is that, but then I remember the NME had this cover when there was the whole contest, wasn't there, for who was going to be the number one, you know,
yeah,
house, I mean, or roll with it.
This is part of the reason why I wanted to have this conversation, because I think sometimes a concept like, say, Britpop or grunge will be introduced into the vernacular and it means something to different people, and that it's not really, it doesn't really exist. Not really, you know, like if we're trying to work out if Suede is part of Britpop because they're lighter or darker, isn't that part of the dissonance? Because you had some bands that were arguably, like, Supergrass is a much more up band, but if they did some darker stuff, does it mean they're not doing Britpop stuff? I don't know.
Well,
what is Britpop?
Let me just say, I am an oxymoron in myself, because I played in 2 bands that are to lesser or greater degrees associated with Britpop, and yet I hate everything Britpop stands for. Simon will also tell you that me saying that is actually partly a lot of rubbish and me posturing, because there are loads of Britpop songs and Britpop bands that I really like. But it's just, so for me, I divorce the kind of concept of Britpop from a lot of, you know, there's a lot of individual songs and bands from that era that are part of that umbrella term that I like. And I think it's just culturally the kind of idea of because for me, what I hated about Britpop per se at the time was I'd got into all the music I'd liked had seemed to be moving forward, and a lot of the music associated with Britpop seemed to be a regression. It was I was like, I've heard these chord changes before, I've heard this kind of melodic idea before, and it seemed to be a lot of harkening back to kind of like some golden age of British pop, or several golden ages of British pop. And I was just like, that's not, and I think that's when I'm talking about, obviously I don't literally mean, I don't think that Britpop caused Brexit. It's just that I associate a kind of cultural backwardness and regression. It's sort of like, it's you can look at it as all part of a kind of, you know, regressive trend basically. And that's certainly, you know, I like a lot of Britpop songs. The idea that was constructed by journalists of Britpop is absolute anathema to me, and I detest it.
Yeah, we hear that. Simon, I don't want to leave you hanging. You were saying about being unconvinced by this article.
Oh no, I didn't really have a lot
about what the article was, and then tell us why you're unconvinced, why it's not.
No,
really...
I mean, I didn't have anything in particular to say. It's just like in 2020, who is talking about Britpop?
We are.
Yeah, we are. And we are like metropolitan liberal elite wankers. Like, and we're dissecting Britpop. Like, we didn't vote for Brexit. So like Britpop fans didn't vote for Brexit necessarily. I don't get the connection.
It's not a literal connection, Simon. I'm sorry. It's not. I very definitely don't literally think that Britpop caused Brexit. And I definitely don't.
But you know, like what Joe said about the sort of ironic detachment and stuff like that.
Mm.
Like, yeah, that's what I think Britpop fans were into.
Mm.
Where do you think it's coming from, this this approximation by these journalists? Do you feel that it's genuine, or is it misunderstanding that period of time? Or is it overly dissecting it because it's like taking out some trousers you used to wear and think, oh God, I used to go down the street in this. I better fucking explain myself.
I think does seem to be quite a large part of it.
Okay.
I mean, from the articles that I've read, sort of looking back at the 90s, there does seem to be quite a lot of personal regret involved in the writer, and I think it can be argued, and it can be argued quite convincingly, that, you know, the sort of optimism that's always talked about with Britpop and its connection to sort of national pride, which was stirred up by the media, not by necessarily the bands themselves, could have led to a kind of jingoistic fervour that's led a lot of people to have a Brexity kind of viewpoint. So I can see why you could have that view. I don't personally know if that's the case, but I can totally see that argument.
Yeah.
But then I also think that there are quite a lot of, it's kind of quite ironic seeing these, a lot of writers kind of going back on themselves and like coruscating themselves for being like, oh, I championed Blur, and now I realise that I was doing the worst thing possible for society. It's like, you're not actually that important. Like, you're just a music journalist. There's quite a large part of it sort of like, the music press of the time was encouraged also to say something about the social, you know, existence of the country. What does this mean about Britain? And it doesn't necessarily mean that much looking back on it. Just the music doesn't. I think it just kind of got all sort of wound up in itself, and then people are still talking about it in terms of it being super important.
I think at a stretch, you could convince me that Britpop helped New Labour get in. I could maybe buy into that, but not sort of right-wing Brexity. No.
Yeah, but again, I think when even referring into a general term, I'm talking about the kind of the journalistic idea of it, rather than you know, people going to gigs kind of thing. You know, it was and I think it just always I remember that Select thing that you were talking about. I was like, that was certainly the first thing I remember, and I just remember being kind of horrified by it, and I always had that I always just had this feeling about it that I was uncomfortable with it. It just felt regressive in so many ways, and I was just like, this isn't what I've signed up for with like indie music. I wanted it to be doing something new and forward looking, you know.
I don't think I was particularly into any of the bands, really, to be honest, at the time. But I think like it was great the way that, in a way, it was great the way that like it brought loads of people together, and you know, sort of London felt quite sort of vibrant, and people were sort of, you know, I suppose in terms of indie music or guitar music, people were sort of, I don't know, unified. I don't even know if that's the right word, but then in another way, there was no sort of diversity. I don't even mean like in terms of ethnically, I just mean in terms of the music, like not like there is now, you know, where there's just so much kind of much more interesting music going on, you know.
Can I pose a question based on what you just said? Perhaps there was diversity, but it wasn't really being pushed for you, the reader,
possibly,
to really check out. You know, it's been lost to time to an extent, unless you're really deep underground and you know this, and you can present that as a
But I suppose it was just harder then to know, wasn't it? Because there was no internet, and it was just like you just got the enemy, and you kind of read what, and you believe what they said. I mean, I was just into These Animal Men and Smash, really. It's only when I look back I sort of think, oh, Pulp were quite good and Supergrass were good, you know. But there was a lot of it that just seemed a bit kind of, you know, a bit stupid, I suppose, looking back on it, you know.
Indeed. We should talk about Pulp. I'm going to move on to the next question. Actually, Pulp is 3 questions away. Bear with me. Another question. What do we stand to lose in the continued reevaluation of Britain's musical boom?
Credibility.
I was just going to say, any last shred of credibility that we have.
Can you repeat that again? Because I think I talked over you or laughed over you. What was the question? Ask them even. What was the answer? What was you just saying?
I said credibility.
Okay.
And I had been about to say every last shred of credibility.
What did you ask, John?
The question was, what do we stand to lose in the continued reevaluation of Britain's musical boom? Simon said credibility.
But wasn't it better in the kind of early 2000s?
What is better? I'd say it was less in terms of how the press was presenting it, or we were more nuanced as a culture to pick up on what was being presented and say, actually, no, this isn't part of some big thing. That's what I'd say. But I might want to defer to Simon's understanding of the 2000s, because I know that's his favorite period in music. As far
No,
as
it's not.
No? I'm sure you said so. I'm sure you said so.
No, I probably was defending it against everyone hating on it, like I always do.
I feel like I've got like my teenage son out of his room just to explain himself. I'm sorry, Simon.
Okay. But yeah, I love Britpop and I love 2000 stuff as well, because like that's when I was young. Why would I not?
Yeah.
I would. Oh, sorry. Oh, was that a hand? See, this has got confusing. But I would like to say I pick up on what the Right Honourable Gentleman, member for Birmingham, Hollywood, just said. Birmingham South just said. And that is because I am also aware. So apart from the kind of cultural thing, when I was, you know, there were a lot of Britpop bands, and that I still, you know, don't like because I find them just like rehashing things that had gone before. But I say that with an awareness. That's because I was of that age that I'd already heard that stuff before. And if I had been a bit younger, I would have loved it. I would have loved all of those bands. And it's just like, you know, like my brother, who's 16 years older than me, didn't understand when I was into Duran Duran and loads of bands I was into, because he was like, we fought the punk wars against all that. It's like whatever's current when you are a teenager is the most exciting thing ever. And it's and I can look at it objectively and go, a lot of them, you know, there was so much music. I'm still hesitating to say good music, but there were a lot of good bands. And I think if I had been really young in that period, I would be looking back on that period saying this was the best time ever for music.
And I think that's an important thing that I disagreed with in the Quietus article, which was saying, for example, that Blur in particular, it all sounds really hollow. It's like a rehashing of stuff that came before. And I'm just thinking, this is somebody in their 20s basically doing what a lot of bands have done before him, which is filtering all of his observations about the world around him through the prism of stuff that he's listened to when he was really young. And I think it's a bit unfair to sort of, I mean, I don't love all of Britpop, and I do understand there was a lot, you know, that was just kind of retreads of nonsense, but I think you can't sort of put that mantle on someone like from not knowing them at all. And, you know, I don't know, maybe it comes down, I don't know, it doesn't come down to that. I was going to almost rehash that awful thing of like, if you haven't made a record, then you can't talk about music, but that's absolute bollocks. But I just think like you have to have some sort of empathy with the person who's making it, as opposed to seeing them as this sort of like detached cultural entity, which he's not. He's a person who grew up in Essex listening to the Kinks. Like,
do you think that we're more unforgiving as a culture now when it comes to discussing certain topics of, well, divisibility, I suppose? which isn't the word. We'll go with it.
Certain topic. Do you mean topics or do you mean music? Because I don't think
Well,
I don't think
stick to music, but I mean, it kind of broaches on that thing that everyone seems to want to do now, which is to kind of understand the past in a way where we pretty much break it down and think about how it could have been to a point without realizing the human element within.
I think if you're talking about music criticism, I'm just speaking of that personally, it was much more critical in years gone by, I think. I think we're always shocked now if we hear someone like having negative opinions about stuff. It sounds quite shocking, and it was kind of the norm when I was first reading the music press. So that's my view on that.
Okay. Any other views on that particular question or subjects that are followed on before I move on to the next thing? Or not? Okay, that's the time allotted for that one. Well, let's move on. Oh, did someone say something? No? Okay. All right, so what cultural progression can be attributed to Britpop?
Charley looks like she wants to say something.
Please, do not censor yourself. Part of the reason why I'm doing this is because I'm bored as fuck of playing Street Fighter 4. So just eliminate my life. Go for it.
I'm amazed that you've managed to put cultural progression and attributed and Britpop in the same sentence. Even the bits that I love about Britpop bands now, I would not see any of them as a cultural progression. By the way, I do like Blur, and I think that criticism that Joe just mentioned about Blur I don't get that. But Blur, of all of them, don't sound like a rehash to me. The thing was, Blur were quite interesting because I think, like Joe said, they kind of synthesized their influences and made something new from it. But I still wouldn't call that a cultural progression. I don't think, and I'm not saying that's necessarily inherently wrong. Not everything has to be progressive, but I don't think Britpop was progressive. That's my view, a strongly felt one.
Could someone give me an example of cultural progression in music terms?
I'd say people stopped playing the guitar the same way when, say, Hendrix was like doing his thing. You know, it had like a certain progression in terms of how people wanted to treat the instrument. I'd say that when the Downward Spiral came out, people realized you can really make something quite messy and dirty and it could still sell. So those are progressions that I'm thinking of just at the top of my head.
Punk.
You want more, Simon?
Not really.
Yeah.
All
right.
No. I sort of agree. Like looking back on it, I sort of think Blur was sort of. I think sort of looking back on it, I sort of think Damon Albarn's a bit of a genius, really, which I never would have thought at the time. You know, when he was doing Parklife and stuff, I was never into it, but maybe not particularly that song. But as an artist, I think, you know, what he's done over the last sort of 25 years has been pretty phenomenal, really. You know, the way that he's kind of developed and changed and done so many different things, and yeah, he really has progressed, hasn't he? I mean, Noel Gallagher's still playing the same songs he was trying to play in '93. You know, it's like
There's a good example.
That's a whole video there.
I mean, Noel Gallagher peaked in like 1994, didn't he? And it just been this like downhill sort of, you know.
But then again, an example about what Joe said earlier. I mean, he's only a human being. Only human. Am I defending fucking Oasis? How is this happening? Sorry, Charlie.
I also wouldn't want to put it into sort of the frame of Blur versus Oasis thing, because I think Oasis, I used to really like Oasis, and I sort of went off them as I got a bit older and just their music got a bit less interesting to me. But I still think that like they have 2 albums that are really exciting kind of guitar music, and I don't think they were trying to do a quite different thing in terms of aesthetic to Blur, but I think the reason why they get lumped in together is because of that thing of like it's very sort of it's very sort of based in your own personal experiences with a sort of retro aesthetic, which isn't necessarily by design retro, but just sort of the things that you were interested in and talking about your life kind of thing, and being in a guitar band and kind of very British person.
It's kind of what happened with Pearl Jam and Nirvana, how the press was using them as a way of saying, hey, choose which trump card is like your favorite. It becomes boys and toys, I think.
Yeah. So. And one thing that I did actually agree with in the Quietus article that I've recently reread, which is why I keep talking about it, is that it said that this sort of division of Blur and Oasis doesn't really make any sense actually looking back on it, because it feels like Parklife is a stepping stone from the early Britpop thing to the later Britpop thing of Oasis. Like it feels like a sort of pulp thing, a pulp kind of like arch observational thing mixed with this anthemic guitar thing that Oasis were doing. And I think, yeah, it's more like a sort of continuum rather than this sort of binary thing.
Sure.
That's
what do the rest of you think?
I have a binary of my own to offer, replacement binary. When Simon was asking about an example of progressive music, this is arguable whether it's progressive, but it certainly was in this context. I was at a recording of Later with Jules one time, and in performing were Anna Calvi, who was, I won't swear, but quite amazing. And, you know, undeniably doing something different to everyone else in that room. And Liam Gallagher's, was it the High Flying Birds or BDI? One of his things that he does, Liam, oh God, the point was there were these two guys in front of me slagging off Anna Calvi all the way through, which was really rude. And I had to ask them to be quiet. And then when Liam Gallagher came on and just did his kind of like just, I don't know, boring stuff, they turned around and went, see that? That's proper music. They literally, that's proper music.
Okay.
And I was like, and I remember thinking, no, that's regression. But they
Well, I think that's the thing, it's the attitude to it that's regressive. I think the thing in and of itself isn't necessarily so.
Yeah,
that's what I was trying to say.
It becomes a vehicle or a demonstration of masculinity rather than an approach to art. And I think that's one of the reasons why groups like, say, Loud Women exist, because there was a lot of that going on and it was never really addressed. But yeah, anybody else have anything to say on that question?
It was a bit laddie, wasn't it? Is that what you mean? When I look back on it, it was a bit sort of, yeah, in a way, which I wasn't too keen on, you know.
Yeah.
A bit sort of a bit vacuous in that kind of way, but you know, anyway, like I don't want to slag it off too much. That summer of '95 was incredible. You know, I was 15. You know, just getting into going out. You know, it was sort of vibrant in a way that it's just not now. You know, I mean, obviously now it's not now, but you know, pre all the virus and stuff.
Yeah, but is it? Because I know I do this myself, because I will think about, you know, I think it's a tendency for everybody to remember the first times that they start going out as though that was the most vibrant time. You know, it's not like that these days. Well, we're not 18 and going out to things for the first time. So how can we compare? We don't know.
That's true. That's true. I like to think I am, but
like
in my head I still am. Yeah.
When I first started going out, it was like 1999, 2000-ish. Now most people would agree that was a much shitter time than 95. I reckon.
Yeah.
You know,
that was Star Sailor, wasn't it? And
it was
like
during breaks.
So
if I was a bit older, I could have seen some
really
cooler bands. Like,
yeah, I remember Placebo being a really good band, and then after the first album, just a big nosedive into nothingness, and I really just, you know, it's coagulated in that last few breaths of the 90s, you know. So yeah. I think Pop Stars The Rivals was rearing its ugly head. There was a lot of things that were coming from a corporate side of music that seemed to be taking what they thought people wanted and just making it really just dumbed down.
Yeah, I mean, I still think, I'd be interested if anyone disagrees, but I think the mid-90s was a much better time for music than pre-Britpop and the tail end of the century. Does anyone think that like 99 was like the best year?
I mean, sorry.
No, you.
I mean, I would say I like 1997, like the beginning of the end, because then you've got things like OK Computer, and you've got Homogenic by Björk, and you've got all this stuff that because of the renewed, I feel like maybe, I don't know, it was because of the renewed like excitement and sales drummed up by the music press, like championing bands from in the sort of mid-90s, then you get just people reading loads more music magazines, and then you get more critically acclaimed, interesting albums like that, which are more sort of paranoid and the sort of thing that, you know, I find a bit more exciting. But then also, I mean, I might find them a bit more exciting because I was of the right age, you know.
Yes.
So yeah, that's the era that I like best.
Yeah.
I kind of want to sound like an old man here. Well, I don't want to sound like an old man, but I inevitably will sound like an old man here. But I remember that there were a lot of flirtations with 60s counterculture around 96, 97 that were just references, like Oasis doing a collaboration with, who was that dance band that I should remember? Chemical Brothers. Who had coming out of someone's ass. There was all sorts of basically sounds which were trying to allude to the idea that we're progressing, we're doing something kind of vaguely, you know, late 60s-ish. So I don't think a lot of those bands were coming from a particularly genuine place. There are notable exceptions, like say Radiohead, and I do appreciate Blur trying to disentangle themselves from what they obviously couldn't control anymore, which was the press pushing them a certain way. You know, I'm sure Damon does regret selling the Universal to a gas company, or maybe he doesn't, but I'd like to think that he does.
What an amazing song.
It's an amazing song. I say that.
I don't think the Chemical Brothers were cynical about it. I think, I mean, I'm a complete apologist at this point, but I think they genuinely do like psychedelic music. And I think that album was like them just going, all right, here's our moment, we can now do this because people will buy it. Rather than if they'd released that earlier on, maybe they couldn't have got Liam Gallagher to sing on it, and they couldn't have, you know, brought all of their psychedelic stuff to the wide audience they wanted to. I think it's genuine and good.
I should put a caveat in there, and I think half of that relationship was like, yay, this could be fun. The other half was like, hey, we can sound even more like the Beatles now. So that's where I'm coming from in it, just from my experience of it.
Fair enough.
I just would like to say, I totally agree with Simon's, and his mid-90s better than late 90s assertion, and I am older and know best.
Thank you, Charley.
In fact, I remember I used to read the like singles review every week and just think all these singles are shit most weeks. And in fact, one week I had to do the singles review for Melody Maker with two of my band colleagues, and I was having a really bad day, so I didn't actually say what I thought because I was sat there feeling really like, you know, inside myself. And that's one of my big regrets, because it was like I got played shit song after shit song and had to try and find something nice about them. And I just remember thinking all music is shit. That's what I thought.
I like the attitude of the like late, say 1997 going onwards. I don't like a lot of the results, but I like the attitude. And even though I am very much attached to like say the mid to the early 90s, just because it was my coming of age and whatnot, I don't know. I feel that article that we keep coming back to did just point out a few things that I wasn't aware of at the time, but now I can't unsee.
Yeah,
I mean, I was aware of it at the time, so, but I am older and know best.
I'm getting my birth certificate out because I'm sure I'm older than everyone in this room, age combined. I'm just saying that right now. Before I go on to the last question, does anyone have anything to say about what we've discussed so far? I don't know.
I think I'd just like to say I really appreciate the honourable member for Birmingham South in pointing out that we've lost all credibility by talking about the 90s in the 2020s.
Yeah.
So apologies, viewers. Yeah, I don't know what we were thinking.
Yeah. The certain irony of looking backwards 25 years whilst accusing fucking brilliant bands of doing the same.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
agreed.
think it's intriguing to look back as a historian. I think this room's been quite balanced, but yeah, you are right, Simon, that there are quite a few edgelords who want to get themselves a certain kind of, say, pedigree by saying that they understand something in a way where it's all really, really shit.
I don't think it's edgelords necessarily, but it's normally old people.
There were quite a few articles that were articles that shares by those articles. Oh wait, was that a dig at me? I didn't write the fucking thing.
No.
I just thought I'd chat about it. What the fuck? Anyway.
That wasn't a dig at anyone.
Okay. I could be just paranoid. Anyway.
I think what Simon's trying to say is that it's his aging live guitarist.
No. No, it goes back to that thing of like, yeah, if you've heard it all before, then yeah, you can hear Blur and go, oh, I've heard the Teardrop Explodes, you know.
Yeah.
But if you've never heard the Teardrop Explodes, it's amazing.
Yeah. And in fact, I remember going to see Birdland and having one of the best gigs of my life. I went in, by the way, preparing to hate them. I'd read stuff about them in the music press. I was like, they're going to be shit, but there's nothing else happening in Exeter, so I need to go and see them. And within half a song, I was down the front, had the best night ever. But everyone that I spoke to that was over 30 were like, well, they just sound like the Rolling Stones and the Sex Pistols sort of mashed together. There's like nothing to it. And I remember just being like so angry. So whenever I'm well aware that as I said earlier, that my dislike of certain bands from the 90s is only because I was old and I already by then, and I'd heard some of that stuff before, you know.
Yeah. And now I'm kind of old, and I sort of look at certain bands and go, really, is this the best we've got?
Yeah.
Like, it's too real for me.
Hopefully it will get better. Situation with COVID is cleared up. But yes, last question, because I feel I'm running out of time, even though I really want to keep talking about this. Shed 7 is a Britpop band, whilst Pulp isn't, but has often been labelled as such. Discuss.
I mean, where does that question even come from? I mean, Pulp have always been a Britpop band, as far as I'm aware.
Britpop for me, because I feel we haven't done that, and it would be nice to know what you think of when they say Britpop, because I don't think Jarvis would actually be saying to everyone that I was a Britpop band, and yet people try and push them away in that way. They try and give them a certain kind of reverence. Would
anybody apart from Shed 7 actually go, I'm in a Britpop band? You know, it's like saying no one's a goth, are they? No one's a Britpop band. Apart from Shed 7. Apart from Filter and Nephilim, of course. You know?
Shed 7 is still going though, aren't they? They had their biggest album, didn't they? Like last year.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
Good on you, Vic.
Yeah, I don't understand the question. So I want you, maybe, John, you could explain your thinking behind the question.
I will. I like being challenged by you, Simon. This is the thing. Whenever people talk about Britpop, they often reserve a safe space for bands that aren't so. They will say Pulp aren't Britpop. They'll say Radiohead aren't Britpop. They say Suede aren't Britpop. And yet they come up in that conversation because they're around that time. Maybe I've answered the question for myself while talking about it, but I wanted to talk about why I reserve a certain place for, say, Shed 7 or the Boo Radleys or Northern Uproar for Britpop as a term.
Well, it's just a convenient way of saying I like these bands. Like it allows me to like these bands, but not these. But like distance myself from these bands. So it doesn't make sense.
I think it's a sort of because of the populism of Britpop that's perceived now, like, and probably at the time, that people just kind of go, oh well, not that thing that everyone likes. Like that's passé now. Like I like the weirder stuff. Like it's just like the old thing of like I like the early stuff. That's always been the case with people who like think they're trendy.
Yeah,
I think it's I think particularly with Britpop, because it's all so imbued within this cultural identity that a lot of British people are quite ashamed of now. It's much more kind of intense, the fact that people want to kind of distance themselves. I'm like, oh no, I don't like Blur or Oasis, because that was like this big mass pop thing that now I feel like, you know, embarrasses me. And you know, the bands that were sort of on the sidelines, but I personally, as a bourgeois outsider, would consider Britpop. Like it's not as emotional for me, but I can understand why people would be like, no, I don't want to side with, you know, these lads.
And also, I think with genre, like you can be a Britpop band, but that doesn't mean that that's all you are. Like you might, like Pulp are so much more than just a Britpop band. And obviously they started, well, in 1978, but like they did stuff in the 80s that is obviously not Britpop. But still, if you're saying name some Britpop bands, you'd have to include Pulp and Blur and Suede. Yeah, Suede.
Yeah, perhaps we're in like a very strange situation that I had a conversation the other day with someone who professed to being a Blur fan, and they didn't know the song Tracy Jacks, and I wanted to know how come that didn't actually occur, and I didn't know the album Modern Life is Rubbish. This is from someone who I think checks out playlists and sees that as a good representation of what happened at the time. So what happens like 20 odd years from now is that people may not necessarily have enough insight into what happened because they may not feel they have to because it's just presented in a certain way. So that's another reason why having this conversation. I thought,
how young were they?
Good question. They were 32.
Wow. Okay.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
as old as Prince Charles was when he married Lady Diana.
Sorry,
I've interrupted there. I said that's as old as Prince Charles was when he married Lady Diana Spencer.
there you go.
John,
a Britpop prism through which to view this particular.
John, if we're going to talk about Britpop, we have to, like, it's a rule, a journalistic rule. We have to end it by saying, and then Diana died.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we're going to leave it. Thank you, Simon, for your notable inclusion. Sorry, I don't know if you want to say anything on that last note.
I can't remember. I lost track of the question again. Sorry.
Well, we kind of answered it for you, but I mean, you can answer it again in your own way. But essentially, we were saying some bands get lumped into being Britpop, some bands don't, and we wanted to know why that is.
I was thinking the Manics never really got affiliated with it, did they? The Manic Street Preachers. The Manic Street Preachers never really got affiliated with it, did they?
You're really good. They weren't affiliated with it in a retrospective way, but at the time,
I don't think so either. I think that Holy Bible album came out, you know, and it was just so much darker than any of it that it feels like well, maybe I'm wrong, but at the time it didn't feel like they were kind of part of it. And definitely looking back, they're never lumped in with it, are they?
Designed for Life was Holy Bible kind of missed.
But that was more 97, wasn't it?
Yes.
96.
96, sorry.
Was it 96? Right. Yeah. But that was a different band, basically, wasn't it?
Yeah. But yeah, Holy Bible came out the same week as Definitely Maybe.
And also the Verve didn't feel like that they, you know, Urban Hymn, Northern Soul. Terrible mistake.
Storm in Heaven.
Sorry, yeah. Northern Soul and Storm in Heaven, yeah. They felt like that they were kind of had their own sort of space as well, which is pretty cool.
Indeed. Thank you all for making sure that I have not bored out of my mind by having this little conversation with me. You've all got records out in some way or another. If you want to tell people about them, you can now. Anyone, or if you've got an anti-capitalist, like, no, don't buy a record. Fuck off.
Can I just show Sim something? Can you see? Oh fuck!
You have to keep talking, otherwise.
Oh wow!
Can you see?
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
We can't see it. Simon, you need to speak.
Speak.
Yes.
Don't
Speak while you show it.
Hello. I'm these animal men.
Oh,
Yeah.
sweet.
I saw them 28 times whilst all Britpop was going on.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's my last note. Yeah.
You don't want to sell any records. What's going on?
I
Nah.
do.
Charlie does.
I do. I've actually got a Christmas song coming out this Friday. I mean, when's this going out, John?
It's
When does
coming
this go
this
out?
Friday. It's being recorded now on Tuesday. I'm that tired. Is it Tuesday? Yeah, it's going to be Tuesday.
Okay, viewers, a little spoiler. This isn't live. This was a recorded. Not a spoiler. We're at the end anyway. But anyway, so this is Friday. Today, my Christmas single has come out, which is called Merry Christmas Actually, and which I recorded with Donald Ross Skinner, and it's great.
Awesome. Brilliant. I hope people check it out. Give me a link to it. I'll put it in the description box. So no one wants to sell their stuff apart from Charlie. Fine. I'm not gonna big you up. It's over. That's the end of the video. Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Hey,
No, I'll put stuff in the description box. Viewers, if you want to check out the records, it's down there. Check it out. Cool.
All right.
All right.
good. Goodbye.
See you later.
I can't work out how to leave. How do I? Oh, there we go.
It's all good.